Greetings, programs, and welcome to the latest episode of the Awesome Friday Movie Podcast. This week, I'm joined by Simon, as always. Say hello, Simon.
Hello, podcast listeners. And good people.
And my name is Matt. This week, we're talking about two reasonably new home releases here in Canada, Eternals and The Matrix. But first, how are you, Simon? How was your week? How's things?
How are things at what should be the tail end of the pandemic? Things are fine. I mean, compared to you, my things are fine. I get to work at home. So basically, I don't see anyone. I didn't leave the house for 3 days this week. And it turns out I'm not one of those kinds of people that is bothered by not leaving the house. Work has been work, but I have seen actually quite a few movies this week and bits of TV.
I know you've actually seen a number of things.
Yeah,
I would say a higher proportion than I would say you usually get to watch.
It's weird. I was saying to you earlier this week. Oh no, it was last week. That I'm in a really weird position at the moment. That I'm sat opposite me. I have a release day PS5 and an Xbox Series X and a gaming PC and a PS3 and an Xbox 360 and an N64 and a PS2. And upstairs I have a Switch, an OLED Switch. And for the last 2 weeks, I have not had the impetus to play anything on any of my fancy consoles. The closest I've got is Regency Solitaire on the Switch,
Ooh.
which is a solitaire game. Came out in 2015 by a designer from Dorset in England. And basically play through a Jane Austen type story whilst playing rounds of solitaire, which I think it's not Klondike, but it's a very specific type of solitaire. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And you unlock power-ups like the beads. If you unlock her beads, she gets to see an extra preview card. Or if you put in a xylophone. Oh no, what's the piano that's not a xylophone?
A harpsichord.
What's the harpsichord? If you unlock the harpsichord, you get to remove a card at will or play the music or something. So all the power-ups are these like Regency era house props.
It sounds like the saucy version thereof as well.
It's saucy as these
unlock our beads and put on the harpsichord and have a great old time.
Now I want to play your slightly weird Midwest version of that. So I've been playing a bit of Regency Solitaire, and my good friend Steve, who you know as well, recently bought a Switch. And what Steve likes to do is, for many, many years, we've been playing Trials together, which is a motorbike game where you basically complete motorbike courses in a certain amount of time. And Steve likes to let me build up some times, and then he sort of cracks his knuckles and beats all of them. So now he's got a Switch. He's been texting me every day just to let me know that he's beaten another one of my times. So that's the other thing I've been playing this week.
Well, Steve, like myself, does not have children, so I imagine he has a little more time to put into it.
Time is ridiculous, but my son now just turned 11, as you know, and he is almost as tall as my wife is. And he goes to bed now like 9:45. And by that point, I'm like, well, there's no point putting a movie on because I'm working tomorrow. I'm up at 6:30 tomorrow. I sound like an old man. But I guess that's why I've been watching a bit more TV. Been watching a bit of Boba Fett. Been watching Peacemaker, which I really, really like. And there was something else. Of course, The Expanse comes to a conclusion this week. I haven't brought myself to watch the final episode yet, but I will be watching that tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we also, I know you haven't been watching them, but I was just telling you before that the series finale of the limited series Station 11 was this week.
Mm-hmm.
Also spectacular. Yellow Jackets, I believe, has its season finale tomorrow. Well, we're recording this Saturday, so right now it's tomorrow. And when you're listening to this, it'll be tonight.
Yes.
And that's also been excellent. We're in a good spot we're in a better spot. This time of year is a better spot for TV than for movies, I think. Although not that there's bad movies coming out, but
No, I watched 3 movies this week, and they've all been really, really good. So as I said to you a couple of days ago, I feel like I feel about movies in my 40s like I felt about games in my 20s. Like I
Hmm.
am getting so much pleasure out of watching movies at the moment, and I always have done. But it's because I can actually find an end to the story within reasonable amount of time instead of being expected to play for weeks and weeks and weeks. But some good stuff at the moment, definitely.
What
How
was
about you?
the
What you been up to?
what was the third movie? What was the third movie that you watched?
So it was something we're talking about in a couple of weeks. We got a preview screener for Pupel of Chimneytown, which is a
Right.
Japanese animated movie with the wonderful Tony Hale voicing a garbage man who visits this kind of steampunky, uh, smoky industrial town, ruled over by this like religious group who have sinister motives for keeping everything the status quo. So
Right.
it's uh, it's lovely. It's very, very Japanese, as we'll talk about, but it's very lovely.
Yes, I think we're talking about that. I want to say next week or the week after.
23rd,
It's on the schedule. I can't remember. We
next week.
actually do
Yeah,
have a schedule for this podcast, so
next
just
believe it or not,
we're quite professional, as I think
next week.
is well established. Um, I have just been watching and enjoying things, which has been a nice change. Um, I made a decision early. I think if you follow me on Twitter, you might have seen that I made the choice that I'm not going to stop writing for the time being. I just have too much other stuff on the go and just focus here on the podcast. So I also have a thread that I started on Twitter that I fully intend to keep going as long as I can remember to do so, where I'm just gonna share all. I'm gonna I log everything I watch on Letterboxd, but I'm gonna just share specifically the films that I'm seeing for the first time, whether they're new releases or classics that I missed or whatever. And that's sort of my this year's movie resolution is to try and watch more, especially old stuff that I haven't seen before. Like, and that's it's sort of self-serving in a couple of ways. One, I mean, everyone has holes in their headcanon for in the filmography of their lives. And I'd like to fill some of those. And also, I have a subscription to both Criterion and Movie that I don't watch enough. So I'm trying to watch at least one thing a week from Criterion, just because why not? I went so long going on so many film festivals and other new releases last year that I let some of my appreciation and love of classic film fall by the wayside. So I'm trying to
Mhm.
fix that a little bit.
It's an interesting point, actually. I don't know if you have a list like I do. Like I have a guilty classic movie list of things I've never seen, like any of the Rockies, for example.
Mm.
And at some point, I feel like I should watch the Rockies. But I really like. I've got a Roku TV, and it has a free channel, which is the Samuel Mayer channel. So it's sort of pre MGM stuff,
Hmm.
but with some MGM as well. But sometimes I'll turn it on, and it has something random on there, and most of the time it's Guys and Dolls, which is a very happy thing to have on the TV. But I turned it on a couple of months ago, and I watched the first quarter of a movie called California Split.
Hmm.
Which I don't know if you know that movie. It's from 1973, and it's got Elliot Gould and George Segal as chance of like gamblers working their way through Vegas and working on their way through their own
Uh,
relationship.
Funny you should mention that is one that I am both aware of and haven't seen.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the part of it I've seen was absolutely brilliant, and it was really interestingly directed, which was Robert Altman
Yep.
is the director of that movie. And the only other Robert Altman I think I've seen is The Player, which I didn't like at all. So I kind of have avoided Robert Altman, but it might be because I don't really like Tim Robbins that I didn't like The Player. But this movie is fantastic, and Elliot Gould is just brilliant, and he's young and dynamic here, and he's such a watchable actor, and he's so I I would love to know how much of that movie is scripted and how much of is him just being cantankerous and speaking of whatever comes to his mind,
Hmm.
because the dialogue does that beautiful like overlapping and crisscross, and it almost sounds like it couldn't be scripted, but it's really, really good. So I do want to go back to that and finish that.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't think it's on Criterion, but I do know that the wow, I'm totally drawing a blank on what this movie's called, but that famous Raymond Chandler mystery story from the 30s.
Big Sleep?
No. Um,
Maltese Falcon, is that Raymond Chandler? No.
no, that's Dashiell Hammett. Anyway, Elliot Gould starred in one in the 1970s that's like a then modern update of that story, and it's on Criterion right now.
Oh, great.
And last week I watched Stormy Weather, which is from 1943, and it's the story of basically of Bill Bojangles, who's at the time was the most popular black entertainer in America. It's 1943, so it's not an entirely unproblematic film, but he's a guy who campaigned against or campaigned for racial equality in Hollywood, and it was sort of amazing that he was one of the highest paid entertainers in America in 1943, which, if I remember correctly, is a year after wow, Bing Crosby did blackface in Holiday Inn in 1942.
Right.
So it was a fraught time. More importantly, Stormy Weather is the movie where every once in a while, if you're on Twitter or social media, someone will be like, "This is the best dance scene ever put to film," and it's the Nicholas brothers, and they're brothers, and they're dancing to a big band song across and up and jumping and leaping with Cab Calloway leading the orchestra, and it's the finale to this movie.
Is that the one where they jump out of a first floor window and land on their knees?
No, but it's the one where there's a big sort of like arch stairways on the stage, and the stairs are about 3 feet high, and they tap dance their way up on one side, and then they leap over one another into splits on each step all the way down.
Oh my God.
They also spend a fair amount of the number jumping between the various like orchestra members, like music stands. It's like 6 minutes long. It's wonderful and joyous, and Cab Calloway's there the whole time doing his Cab Calloway thing, which I don't know if any of you listeners have seen Cab Calloway like perform with his orchestra on film, but like he's such a boisterous and dynamic presence. It's the whole movie is wonderful. It's like 80 minutes long, and there's like 20 musical numbers, so like it's like nonstop amazing people doing amazing things. It's wonderful. You should watch it.
What year was that from?
43.
See, there's a wonderful crossover when film took loads of theatre actors, where it was just completely assumed that all main actors were triple threats. These days, if someone sings and dances and acts at the same time, it's special. And there's very different approaches to screen acting and stage acting.
Yeah.
But I love that time. I love movies from that time where suddenly you'll see people singing and dancing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff because that was their training.
Yeah, I mean, this is very much a movie musical as well, and I sort of buried the lead. Not only is it Bill Bojangles, but it's also the entire cast is black, which is somewhat not totally out of the ordinary for 1943. There were two in that year, but like it also wasn't exactly the norm, right? Like we are now familiar with the history of racial tension in America. So
is there somewhere?
Yeah. So who knew? Who knew?
Clara's watched the newer version of Hairspray twice in the last 2 days, and the rest of the time the soundtrack's been on. So she came up. She was like, "Can you believe like people of different races dancing together at that time? Crazy." I'm like, "Yeah." So she's definitely learning.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. She was washing herself in the bath, and I'm on my phone, and she's like, "Dad, what are you scared of anything when you die?" And I'm like, "Not really." She's like, "You are scared of something." I'm like, what? What? She's like, "You're scared of going to hell."
For context, listeners, this young lady is about to be 8. She'll be 8 in June, right?
He just absorbs everything, and processes everything. So she's been watching a British TV show called Ghosts, which she loves. So I don't know, but she comes out with all these kind of things. So Hairspray is her thing she's absorbing at the moment, and she was dancing around to the soundtrack this morning. And let me tell you, as a theatre kid and a movie musical kid, seeing your kids like dancing around to movie musicals is pretty great,
Hmm.
actually. And Ellie's been listening to Hamilton non-stop as well, so we have to watch that.
Yeah.
That's my son. So yeah, hopefully might have a couple of theatre kids, so
Hooray.
they can be broke forever as well.
But at least they'll be artistically fulfilled.
Well, that's the most important thing, isn't it?
It should be. It should be. Anyway, shall we
What's
now that
your
we
favourite
bantered,
movie?
should we talk
Yes,
about a film or perhaps two?
let's talk about a film.
Yes, yes. Why don't you give us a quick rundown on the Marvel's Eternals, which is the 20th entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and just came
Yes,
out on Disney Plus in America and Canada, and I think other places. I assume it's on whatever service Disney owns in all the places they have one.
I think it's everywhere,
Yeah.
pretty much. So, Eternals is very wide in scope in that it begins 6,000 years ago, where basically a spaceship arrives, and it's the ancient alien kind of um, story where aliens turn up and nudge human civilization in the right direction. So we don't know much at the beginning. Conveniently, I don't know if this happens in the comics, but these Eternals um, have their memory wiped at the end of each thing they do. So we
Oh,
see
we
them when they're just
spoilers.
well, I mean, it's right at the beginning of the movie because they wake up and they're like, "Oh, hi, like who are
Mm.
you and who are you?" So they don't know. All they know is that they have to do the will of their overlord called Arisham. There's a big space dude,
Yeah,
and
a celestial in Marvel parlance.
thank you.
Arishem,
You
the
know what I mean.
prime celestial,
So Matt's
sends.
here for the proper terminology, and it's me is like, yeah, big red dude who's in space.
Yeah,
Um, and so all they know, because it's a cycle, they know that they do what they're told, and they're told to go to this planet and just help civilization and defend civilization from these monstrous creatures called the deviants, which are big, like twisted, sinewy, like animalistic demons that eat
yeah,
humans.
and in this particular version, they're only allowed to interfere in anything if the deviants are involved, which becomes a plot point later on.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That's the way they get out of Marvel's kind of painted itself into a bit of a corner with these movies now, because with each one you've got to ask, like, where is everyone else? So they do try and answer that a little bit.
Yeah, at least
So
in this
basically,
one, there's definitely a moment where they're like, once one of the main human character figures out is that they are like immortal godlike beings. He's like, why didn't you help fight against Thanos? And they're like, we're not allowed. And
yeah,
that's just the end of the
sorry.
conversation.
So basically, without revealing too much, we follow them over 6,000 years of interacting with humans from ancient like Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then up through like, and then we see Jamaica like modern day London. So the um, the threat they thought they'd destroyed reappears, of course, and so they feel that they are duty bound to stop it. And in that journey to stop it, they start learning more things, and things are different for them. They've been able to beat these deviants before, but now things have changed. And basically, that it's a bit of an unfolding mystery. And in the middle of all this is some really interesting stuff about mental um, almost like dementia, like their version of dementia, like the weight of memory causing one of the characters to have significant behavioral differences. The more the more the characters learn, the more they have to make decisions about the nature of themselves and the nature of the universe and who's right and who's wrong. For a Marvel movie, it actually deals with quite deep things, quite interesting conversations in a not a very black and white way. And what I actually really liked is that it takes its time to do that. It doesn't just zip through all these moral conundrums, and it's not black and white. There's
Hmm.
no black and white. There's lots of gray area, and which they struggle with. And so basically they discover something and then they have to decide, are they going to let it happen or are they going to stop it? And that's basically the crux of the framing for the whole conversation about their identity, their who's on the right side. Everyone thinks they're the good guys, and that really examines this as well. And it's wonderful. I think I liked it more than you. I It
Yeah,
really helped me going
probably.
in expecting it. I was expecting it to be bad because I'd heard it was bad, and so I'm sure that helped. But I mean, what's your take on this?
I mean, for a Marvel movie, it is quite, it's not exactly, reaching into the depths of the human soul to reveal something profound, but for this kind of movie especially, it's not shallow. You know, I really there's 10 Eternals, so it's a big ensemble cast. Everyone in it is good. With for me anyway, I would say that like actually it's hard to choose a standout because they all are sort of so good in their own ways. Even right down to Richard Madden, who plays Icarus, who's the basically Superman. His power is basically that he's Superman. They all have different powers, but he flies, is invulnerable, and shoots laser beams from his eyes like he's Superman. um, and he's quite wooden, but that is not because he's acting poorly. That's because his character is quite stoic and quite wooden and dealing with the weight of decision and choice and all of this other stuff. And I really liked it. Is what I'm trying to say. I hadn't heard that it was a lot of critics that I do generally line up my tastes with didn't like it, or at least thought it was too slow, or there wasn't enough action. Um, I don't share that sentiment. I thought it's a very long movie. It's 2 and 3/4 hours long, if memory serves. But it tackles everything in basically the only way it can with so many characters and with such themes. And then it's true that there isn't quite as much action, but there it's not really the point of the story. And when there is action, it's bright, it's clear, you can see what's happening, never lose a sense of geography. The way that their powers manifest is beautiful. And this film is full of gorgeous cinematography and even for a Marvel movie, maybe in spite of it being a Marvel movie, a lot of those effects are really seamless. Like in a lot of Marvel films, you can definitely see the seams, and in this one, I had a hard time seeing them. So
I was really thankful for that actually. That all the fight scenes were against blue skies in sunshine with passive cameras, with wide angles,
yeah,
with very few cuts. It's such a pleasure, and it's so different from what we have to put up with. We've moaned about this many times before, but
yeah,
it really felt like if you're going to make a comic book movie, some of when I was reading comic books, the things that really caught my eye were these big pulled back wide shots of people like blasting into the sky, like not close ups of like 3 inch away from their fist as it punches someone. And this movie is so beautiful. Like the whole thing is uh, print it out and frame it. Like every still could be framed, and there's multiple moments where it took my breath away in the design as well. But the cinematography, obviously, the director. You're going to tell me the director's name now,
her name is Academy Award winner Chloe Zhao.
right? So she has that beautiful wide panoramic approach to framing that really fit this movie beautifully, and the I really like how there wasn't a huge amount of action. I'm so sick of Marvel CGI fests, and yeah, this ended in a big CGI fest, but in a very different way from, say, like Shang-Chi.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, this was one of the few Marvel movies where violence was not the answer, and that surprised me as well. Like the resolution to it,
Mm-hmm.
the the I thought Gemma Gemma Chan really has the focus of the focal character for learning about who they are and what their responsibilities are. And I think she did a really great job sort of being the audience's door into what we're seeing. And the more she learns, the more we learn. And it was a really affecting drama in places.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was uh, so different from the roller coaster that we're used to out of the studio. And it's unfortunate. I mean, the pandemic didn't help, but it didn't do the numbers. That's why it's already on Disney Plus. Like, it didn't do numbers. It doesn't have a great reputation. It didn't make much money. I read last week it's considered to be a rare commercial and critical failure from MCU. So I was in no hurry to watch it, and it's
It's
a
weird.
shame that they get this much more mature kind of movie, and because for them it's a failure, we're gonna just keep going back to CGI battle number 17, where we know as soon as we go in what this movie is going to be from beginning, middle, and end.
I mean, it also speaks to just the way we treat film as a society. Where this movie cost $200 million to make, and it grossed $400 million, and somehow it's a failure. You know, and I know the somehow is that when your movie costs 200 million. I mean, the first thing is that does that include marketing or not? Because that's often another 50, 60, $100 million. But
Mm,
also, if it costs $200 million to make, well, the theaters take. I think in Disney's case, I think they take 40%, but then in most studios' cases, they take 50. So
mm,
you immediately have to double the number in order to make money, right? But then also, coming out, it came out right in October 2021, which was, I don't know about where you were living, dear listener, but here that was at just at the end of the second peak of the Delta wave of the pandemic. Like, it wasn't really safe to go out.
mm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's sort of a perfect storm. They, but it's a good movie. I get why some people didn't really connect with it, but I really liked it. I thought it was really pretty. That was really beautiful, and
Yeah,
it's funny too because like I already pointed out that it's 2.75 hours long, but like Endgame is 3 hours long.
wow.
The Lord of the Rings are all minimum 3 hours long, right? Like movies are allowed to be long, is what I'm trying to say.
And it didn't feel overlong. Like I don't,
No,
I really
I
enjoyed.
thought it was really well paced actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think
Enjoyed
that,
how it's story.
and it's when you consider that the action scenes are not the point of the film,
Mm,
then it makes a lot more sense, I think.
mhm.
And then, I mean, the cast of 1,000 stars from around the planet was also a nice touch as well.
Yeah, but it was a brave move to put Kit Harington and Richard Madden in the same movie and expect me to know which is which. I mean, you might as well just get Sebastian Stan in there and just really confuse the hell out of everyone. When it started and we started with Richard Madden and then we cut, the next scene is Kit Harington in London. My first thought was, so what's he doing here now? Like, why is he now in London now?
I
Like,
mean,
I
you are a little face blacked. Let's just be honest.
come on, they look identical.
One of them is like 6 inches taller than the other. Not to mention,
They
totally different hair and eye color.
oh
And
well,
yeah, and
then
one speaks in a British accent, and the other one speaks in a lovely Scottish brogue.
which is also a British accent.
Yeah, well,
Don't
I'm
tell them
sorry.
that.
I'm sorry. English. One's English, and the other one's Scottish.
Uh,
I thought you'd be
I would
happy
love.
when the rest of the world says Britain. What they really mean is England. So like,
No, I know. Just don't tell the Scottish and the Welsh that.
yeah,
The at the end of this movie, of course, this is not a spoiler. It says Eternals will return, and I really hope that's true,
yeah.
but I don't think they will. I don't think there'll be a sequel. I think they'll have them in some form somewhere, but the way I feel that Disney really chases money, chases the thing that sells, I don't think they'll make another Eternals. I would love them with
Well,
Chloe.
So it's difficult to explain why without getting into some spoilers. But while I don't know if they'll make another, I mean, the film ends on a cliffhanger. But while I don't know if they'll make another Eternals movie, I sincerely doubt we've seen the last of any of these characters. Personally,
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, there's a couple of theories floating on the web, around the web. One which I kind of like, to do with how some of them are going to tie in. But at the end of the film, despite having won the day, the Eternals themselves are somewhat scattered. So there's definitely some plot threads that will need to be wrapped up. And I mean, there's Marvel is so good at just taking aspects of even their bad films and remixing them into their good films that I don't really have a problem with that. Like even down to, I mean, they basically have embraced at this point that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is basically a TV show, and every new thing is just another episode in that TV show.
Yeah.
And the only difference right now compared to say like 2-3 years ago is that they're back. Two differences: one, they're back at the beginning of the story because they finished the Infinity Saga, so they're
Mm.
building out, and now they're building out two new stories, like two new levels of story. Um, One that's very cosmic and one that's very down to earth. And
What's the down to earth one?
what's that?
What's the down to earth one? So Doctor Strange and Spider Man are the cosmic dimension stuff. So what's the down to earth one?
Oh, they're clearly building towards a Young Avengers team too.
Oh, okay.
What with new young Hawkeye and Ms. Marvel, and there's a Wiccan and Speed from WandaVision. Like basically, they're building towards a Young Avengers team.
Those two Wanda's kids end up being Young Avengers in the comics.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't
Wiccan,
realize they were
Wiccan, Wiccan, and Speed are their superhero names.
Wiccan,
Yeah, he's a witch. He's got his mother's chaos magic power.
witchy, witchy stuff.
Yeah. So
Uh,
so yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. In the same way that like the Marvels does not look to be is a the Marvels is the next Captain Marvel movie, and as much as it is a sequel to Captain Marvel, it's also going to be a sequel to WandaVision and Ms. Marvel, right? So
mm,
I think they really embraced that model that just the next thing on their calendar is the next chapter we're going to see.
mm,
Um, which honestly I kind of like because it gives the whole story a little bit more of an ongoing feel. But and like, but the downside is that it's pretty easy to throw on Captain America, you know, 1, 2, and 3, and get a complete story out of those. I don't know that we'll necessarily have anything so clearly delineated moving forward, but I don't
mm.
think that's a bad thing. I think it's just a thing.
And where do you think, if you had to predict where we'll see the Fantastic Four and the X Men crop up again, is this going to be within this cycle of story, or is that way into the future? Would you say?
I have no idea about the X-Men. I kind of hope that they just leave them alone for a while.
Mm,
They already have, for better or for worse, they already have the Eternals and they already have the Inhumans. So if they really want to do mutant characters, they can do something else.
mm-hmm.
Fantastic Four are already on the calendar, so they don't have an official
Yeah.
release date, but there's a
Ah,
Fantastic Four movie that's been announced. It's coming. It's by the guy who directed all three Spider-Man movies, all three Marvel Spider-Man movies.
oh, I didn't know that. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's the furthest out one they have actually announced, but it is announced.
Mm-hmm.
We know exactly nothing about it except for that John Watts is directing it, but
Mm-hmm.
it is announced. So
Cool.
if I had a theory as to where we might see an Eternal again, it'll be in Shang-Chi 2.
Can you say which Eternal without us getting into spoilers?
No,
And
but
why?
it doesn't matter. But doesn't matter which Eternal. But I think that they'll track one of them down because my my theory at the moment, as much as I hate to be the guy who like builds up a theory and then is let down by his own expectations, but my theory is that the Ten Rings themselves are Eternal's technology.
Ah. Well, they do kind of look that way, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, especially once you see the big finale in the movie The Eternals, uh, when they all have a new thing that's a ring they wear around their wrist. Um, but also like the mages and everyone else was not able to identify them, so they're either super old or super new, right? At the
Mhm.
in that post credit scene in Shang-Chi, and they're sending a signal out to somewhere in the universe. So
Mhm.
it would make sense for them to need to find one of the Eternals to at least to um, answer that question.
I like it. I'd watch that.
Yeah,
I'd watch anything with the tunnels in at this point. It's kind of made me interested in Marvel movies again, which I wasn't sure was possible, to be honest.
yeah. I mean, it helps the cast was all great too.
Hmm.
Diverse and wonderful. And I do think the Jack Kirby created the Eternals when he came back to Marvel after a stint at DC where he created the New Gods. Um,
Ah,
uh, and his
really
stuff is
branching that
all big and cosmic and weird, and I love the Celestials for that reason. And I also think it's really neat the way that they didn't, that they set up the Eternals to not be interfering with human history, but to have clearly influenced it as well through their feats, right? Like
way. Yeah.
it's not like and it's very easy to see why Makari is called Makari, for example, because they made it as like a root name for Mercury, the Roman messenger god.
Right.
Yeah. And the story about and Icarus and like Gilgamesh, the hero who fights the bull in that, like they're all there is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's
I
easy
really
to,
like the idea that we recognize their names from stories, and because they were stories they told using their names at the time, so
yeah,
they basically made themselves famous
yeah,
by making up stories about themselves.
yeah, yeah. I thought it was really neat and
Ah, it was really cool.
very very pretty.
Great soundtrack too by the guy I can never pronounce his name, but he's very very famous and very very good. Oh, I'm so
Oh, is it
sorry.
Raman Djawadi?
Thank you, that guy. Great soundtrack and stunning to look at. Like that's a 4K purchase right there. That's when if I can get hold of that at a reasonable price.
Yeah, and if you're watching it
Love.
on Disney Plus like I did, and you have a big glorious TV, and you
Mhm.
can not be distracted by the changing aspect ratio, the IMAX enhanced scenes are amazing to watch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's true. Okay, good.
Yeah,
So Eternals, 2 thumbs up. Go watch it. It's better than you think it is. Give
yeah.
it time. So, what's our second movie today?
Oh, this evening our second film selection is a long-awaited sequel to a classic trilogy of late '90s and early zeros cinema. Lana Wachowski has made a fourth Matrix film called The Matrix Resurrections, which I really liked. It uh, even less than
Okay, so
Eternals. I don't want to tell you anything about this movie, but in order to get
mhm,
some of it out of the way, the basic premise is that uh, Neo is alive despite having died at the end of the third film. It is years later, and he's in the Matrix, but he doesn't know that he's in the Matrix. Within the Matrix, he's Thomas Anderson again, and he is now a world renowned game designer who 20 years ago made a video game trilogy called The Matrix, which the whole world loves and he's famous for. And this opens the door to so many self-referential moments and so many opportunities for the film to critique itself and critique its own audience and critique the way we consume art and to critique the way we interact with computers and social media. Um, i i adored this movie. I really did. I have some
mhm,
gripes about it, and I don't
mhm.
really want to tell you any more of the plot or any of the big reveals, but I adore this movie, and I think you should watch it. If you're a Matrix fan, I mean, it's a Matrix sequel, so you're either going to love it or hate it. It seems to be how these things go. But I
Mhm.
really liked it. I really, really liked it.
Yeah, I did too. I think it's fair to say it's not going to have the same impact as the first Matrix did in terms of film technology and in terms of seeing things on screen you've never seen before. It doesn't have that same kind of impact, but it's at this time it's very actively not trying to. In fact, it even jokes about that. Like it's very it's very theatrical in the way that it breaks the fourth wall multiple times in
Oh
terms
yeah,
of
one of
what
my
the
favorite moments in the whole film is actually right at the very beginning, where Thomas Anderson, the game designer, is called into his boss's office, and his boss says, "Our parent company, Warner Brothers, has demanded we make a sequel to The Matrix." And then
yeah,
Thomas Anderson, Keanu Reeves, is like, "But we said we'd never do that." Just like it knows exactly what it is. It knows exactly what everyone was going to say about it, and
yeah, yeah.
it's wears that on its sleeve. And in more than a few places, it's very critical of the way the film's played out and some of the characterizations therein. And in a lot of
Mhm.
places, it's also very critical of Matrix fans. I think a very specific swath of Matrix fans, but very critical of Matrix fans, which I also kind of
Yeah.
love it for. Like I get the feeling that there's a not insignificant proportion of the people who I have seen talking about this film in a negative light, who are exactly the kind of fans. I'm doing air quotes because this is radio.
I can see them.
Um,
I can verify.
yeah, exactly the type of fans who this movie is kind of just saying "fuck you" to.
Hmm.
People who are obsessed with it in the wrong ways about the wrong things and for the wrong reasons. And the movie, but there's we live in a world where two trans women made a film about self-actualization, and the metaphor they used has been co-opted by men's rights activists. It's we live in a shitty timeline. But those kinds of people are exactly the kind of people that this movie is pretty actively saying fuck you to, and I kind of adore it for that.
Yeah, and they're very clearly characterized in the sort of think tank of game designers that he has to work with. It's very, very much targeted at those kind of people.
Yeah.
I mean, I this movie dodged my preconceptions pretty deftly, but one thing that I liked that I was not ready for, I don't think this is a real spoiler. I was not ready for the first hour of this movie to be an examination of long held trauma and
Mm-hmm.
creative like depression.
Yep.
Like it doesn't. I was expecting this movie to start with guns and have guns in the middle and end with guns, and it takes its time. And bless him, Keanu Reeves looks absolutely broken in this. His eyes in this when he gets called in to his boss, who's played brilliantly by Hamilton's King, Jonathan
Jonathan Groff.
Groff,
Yeah.
who is just brilliant in this. Um, the his sort of body language and his demeanor and it, even though he looks like he does in John Wick, he does a really good job of showing physically a very different character who is so tired and so done. And then there's a montage as he's trying to find his creative spark, and it's hilarious. But I'm sure every game designer in the world who's watching this is like, "Fuck, it's that. It's exactly that. It's complete desperate, like nothingness. It's a
Mm-hmm.
void." And I loved how this movie really took its time to show the state of mind of this person, not just treating him as another like video game movie character, but like allowing us to see his trauma and to experience his trauma. I thought that was really moving, actually, really
Yeah.
affecting.
Yeah, I did too. Um, and you're right. Keanu Reeves, I think, is he's a action superstar, but I think he's also a better actor than we ever,
Hmm.
even when we are giving him credit, I think he's a better actor than we ever give him credit for, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and I think that him and Carrie-Anne Moss still have a pretty undeniable chemistry, even though I think
Yeah.
the movie does one thing that I like in that it makes Trinity more important to the story than I think she
Mhm.
has been in the past, but also kind of sidelines her, which is, I mean, it's kind of a natural extension of the way the film sort of has to be written for that to make sense. And I know this is all very vague and that's very purposeful, but I just, what I'm trying to say is that I wish Carrie-Anne Moss was in the movie just a little more.
It's interesting because I totally see what you're saying, but I felt this movie made a very clear statement that it was never just Neo by himself. It was always Neo and Trinity. The reason why they did everything was because it was this compound. It was never one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost felt like this movie raised her profile to be as important as Neo,
Well, no, that's
especially.
what I'm saying, right? Like the within the story, she is more important, but within the film, she is less present. Like, not that she's performing bad, just that like she just doesn't have as many scenes. She's kind of in the background.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But this is the first of a new trilogy, isn't it? Are they
No,
making?
no, I don't think so. I
Is this
just,
not? Oh, okay. I think there'll be another one,
I mean, maybe.
and without spoiling anything, I think we'll probably see a lot more of her in that one. But the
I
a
mean,
standout for me.
their, I mean, their
Sorry.
their their bond, the sort of compound that is Neo and Trinity, has always been the most important thing. But this movie does go out of its way to very plainly state that in a way
Hmm.
that I think was really effective.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, love Jessica Henwick in this movie as well. I think she's a stunning actress, and I could watch her do anything at all times.
Yep. Also,
Yeah,
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 Yaha Abdul
exactly.
Mateen 2 is also
Yeah.
excellent as
Yeah.
the new Morpheus.
Hmm.
He has, I don't know how much stuff you've seen him in, but he has such an interesting and dynamic and cool screen
Yeah.
presence. And he just,
And he had so much fun in this as well, didn't he?
yeah, he gets all the best costumes. He gets most of the best like quippy one-liners, and he just looks the coolest. He's so effortless in the role.
Hmm.
Um, I also really enjoyed that. I mean, obviously, outside of the big roles, which are Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, Yahya Abdul-Mateen too, Jessica Henwick, Jonathan Groff, and Neil Patrick Harris is in this as well as Thomas Anderson's therapist in a role that
Hmm.
I would say that I have enjoyed Neil Patrick Harris in for the first time in a long time because I'm not as big of a fan of him as I once was.
Oh, good.
Um, but also, what I was trying to come around to say is that I love that a lot of the supporting cast who aren't people we've seen before or anything like that, a lot of them are just people the Wachowskis have worked with a bunch now. Like basically everyone else on the main ship in this movie are all from Sense8, all of them. And like
Oh, I never saw Sunset.
you showed, it's really good and interesting and weird. Um, and like yeah, the what's his name? The taller Caucasian gentleman. His name is now I'm gonna have to look him up.
Oh,
Brian Smith. He's from
right.
Stargate as well. He was on Sense8. Um, uh, and I'm going to mispronounce this, but it's Arendira Ibarra.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
she was great. I liked her.
Beautiful, talented Latina actress was also on Sense8. Um,
Hmm.
the Toby, and I'm going to mispronounce this too, but it's Onwumere. Onwumere. He's African, and he plays the operator in this film, and he was Calpheus on set. Like everyone was in Sense8, basically. um, and even the one like legacy character who shows up is the Merovingian, and I mean it's a bit of a spoiler to say that he shows up at all, but he shows up for such a brief period of time, and he's such like
Yeah,
a pointed moment of like fuck you to the past, or to the the way the past has been interpreted. It's he's Lambert Wilson is a gift. So
yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's a good movie. What else can I say? It's a good movie.
What were your gripes? Like, can you talk about them without going into spoiler town? We can spoil gently, can't we?
Yeah, I mean, so my main gripe, if I have one, and I do, is the same gripe that even the other people who did like the movie tend to have, and that's that the action is just not as good. Like
Yeah.
it's like the fight choreography is nowhere near at the same level. The camera work around the fights is really janky. It's really jagged. It doesn't do the same like in the original film, especially. The camera would often like move in and out of fight scenes, but stay in longer takes, longer not like long takes, but like longer shots to make the fights more fluid and to really
Yeah.
give you a sense of place and anchor you in the geography of each fight. This movie does not do that. It
Yeah.
cuts a lot. The camera moves too much. It's often either too close or too far away, or there's simply too much happening in a frame. And
Mhm.
and especially in those ones where there's a lot of things happening in the frame.
Mm.
I don't know if it's a function of me having watched it in 4K or just that it's not good, but there's definitely one or two widely shot action scenes where I can see that they aren't really fighting. Like it's
Yeah.
very stagey and very half-hearted a couple of
Mm.
times. And that, as much as that is a minor gripe, because that's not really the point of this film, and the film actually, again, goes out of its way to say that none of this is the point of the film. But
Mhm.
the Matrix and the Matrix sequels originally have some of the greatest action sequences and cinematography.
Mm.
I mean, of the '90s at least, but I mean, debatably, they're in the conversation for all-time lists. I would say,
Mm.
you know, the highway sequence in the Matrix Reloaded, I think, is the by far the best action sequence in the whole franchise. But it's probably one of the greatest action sequences since the new century, I would say.
Mhm.
And this movie,
Mhm.
at no point, I mean, maybe it's not fair to say this movie doesn't come anywhere near that, but it also doesn't come anywhere near any of the other fight sequences or action sequences in the previous films at all, either. But again, the movie goes out of its way to say that if that's the kind of thing you're here for, that's not the kind of movie that it's going to be. So,
Yeah.
and it also says that if you're the kind of person who's obsessed with the style and action of the Matrix, then maybe you're enjoying the Matrix wrong. So
Mm.
it's
No,
uh,
you're.
it's a
I
double edged
don't.
sword.
I don't disagree at all. I found some of the fight choreography very, very clunky. And when you compare it to, is it the second Matrix movie where there's this fight on a stairway with the twins going this beautiful stairway and they pull weapons off the wall? Is that the second Matrix?
It is. That's Reloaded. Yeah, that's right.
And
That's like one of the one of the last big fight scenes before the end of that movie.
right, well, and that's an exceptionally shot and choreographed bit of fighting. There's nothing in this movie that's even remotely like that. Like
Yeah,
the when you watch the original trilogy of the Matrix movies, for better or worse, the fight scenes or the choreography rather, and the very artistic shooting of all these action scenes really stays with you. And the it's just shot in a completely different way. Like I wonder how much influence the co Wachowski director had in that, but or if it's a stylistic choice just to not do anything like that. It's interesting that this film didn't have that green tinge that any of the originals do. It's more of a bluish tinge. So maybe it was a choice not to be so controlled and stylistic. I don't know.
I mean, the Matrix definitely still has a very light green tinge, but it's nowhere near as strong. And the real world has much less of a blue tinge as well. Like, but I think it's still present. But I don't think it's a choice so much as that it's been 20 years and Lana Wachowski has done a lot of other stuff as a filmmaker and has different interests now.
Mm,
Um, which
mhm.
is, that's basically what the film is talking about too, right? Like
Yeah.
it's 20 years later. The film doesn't even like on a more surface level. The original Matrix really, I mean, it was a story of self-actualization and all kinds of stuff. But one of the big critiques is that people were sort of worried that computers would eventually oppress us. And this movie this Matrix isn't even that anymore. Like this Matrix is very much one of. I think it would be a very easy line to draw to connect the way that the new Matrix oppresses people to social media.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's characters that talk about just how much noise there is in the Matrix just to like keep you occupied. There's a whole moment where a character explains that like keeping you sad but hopeful is the way to be. Like both hopeful and afraid is the way to keep people in line. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what social media does to people. You know, you're
Mm-hmm.
constantly, to use a metaphor I like to use for myself all the time, is it constantly has people comparing their behind the scenes reels to other people's highlights, you know? Like
Mm-hmm.
um so I think it's just 20 years. What I'm trying to say is that it's just 20 years later is what I think. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a choice so much as an evolution.
Yeah. But it
So
would fit with the general tone as well. Like it's a much gentler movie in terms of savior figures. Like Neo's not a savior figure in this. In fact, he spends much of this movie just reacting to the situation around him and moving towards. He has one objective, and he's not really interested or able to do any of the histrionics from his like Jesus fighting and flying and stuff. So, and he doesn't want to be that anymore. And in terms of him as a main character, it's a much gentler approach and a gentler movie as well. And it's got a lot more to say about smaller stakes.
mhm.
You're right. The Matrix is almost, without spoiling too much, the humans and the machines aren't really us and them anymore. Like there's not this big war that he has to resolve. He's just got his own personal stakes in this, and it's not what I expected, but really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed that smaller, like gentler approach to what he wanted. I really liked it.
Yeah, I mean the choices he's asked to make in the original trilogy are ones that affect, the fate of the planet. And while they don't
Mhm.
not exactly do that, it's still effectively the same choice in this movie as it is at the end of Reloaded, especially. Um,
Mhm.
but the stakes are much smaller and much more personal and much more, about his wants and needs and love than anything else.
Yeah.
It's effectively a love story, which is
Oh
nice.
yeah. Totally. Oh, it's absolutely a love story.
Yeah. So
It's always nice, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, it is.
Oh, two thumbs up. Go see it. Actually, don't go see it. Well, you can watch all of these at home now.
Yeah,
You
the
don't need to go.
Matrix. We were going to talk about something else this week, but the reason we're talking about the Matrix is that it became available on demand yesterday,
Yep.
or if you're listening to this on Sunday, so Friday. Um,
Hmm.
and you should totally buy. I just bought it on iTunes. I bought it without having seen it on iTunes, and I'm glad that I did because I am definitely going to watch it a number more times, and I will probably eventually buy it on physical at some point. So
Is it out on iTunes? I thought it was just on rental on like Cineplex and
So you can
different places.
and to be fair, listeners, we're in Canada, so keep that in mind. You can rent it. It's a premium rental on iTunes for 25, or it's a early purchase on iTunes for 30.
Oh,
It's also available on, again, Canadian services, but you can buy it on Telus Optic. You can buy it on Cineplex. Most of the places
okay.
you can buy movies, it's basically available to purchase now,
Yeah,
or at least to rent at premium rental prices.
it's worth it as well. You should watch this movie.
Yeah.
So next week we the thing we were going to talk about this week.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about it next week with Poupel.
Yes. And if you, that's one, so that the one we're going to talk about next week that we were going to be talking about today is The Tragedy of Macbeth, starring Denzel Washington and directed by Joel Cohen. And it's out on Apple TV Plus now. So if you have purchased an Apple device in the past 2 to 12 months, you can probably watch it and then hear what we have to say in an informed way.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see my favorite Shakespeare play done by a Cohen with Denzel, like
Mm-hmm.
in black and white. The trailers just look amazing, and I'm definitely finding time where I can watch it in one chunk.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
maybe
true story. We're recording this again on a Saturday afternoon, and when we're done, I'm going to make dinner, and then before I edit this episode, even my wife and I are going to watch it. So,
Right.
yeah, good,
Nice.
lovely.
Well, thank you for listening. Here are some messages about how to support us.
Yes, thank you for listening. We do appreciate each and every one of you. If you would like to support us in a more direct way, you can do so by subscribing to us on your favorite podcasting platform and giving us a 5-star review. These help us get in front of more eyes and thus in front of more ears. Is that
Sure,
a thing? Is that a thing? It works.
can be.
It's English. If you say it enough times in English, it becomes a thing. So I'm just going to keep saying in front of your ears.
That's literally how the stupid language works. So yes.
Yeah. And we're available on Apple and Google and Amazon and all of the podcasting platforms. And if you'd like to support us a little more directly, we do, of course, have a Patreon at patreon.com/MC Simpson, I believe. And you can find all these links at awesomefriday.ca. Any messages from our sponsor for you?
Remember, the more money you give us, the more we can talk about things. So if you'd like us talking about things, then give us money. We
That's
appreciate
quite true.
all of your. I am unaware how SEO works and how you're the knowledgeable one, but I imagine asking for money is never a comfortable thing. But I imagine that if you go on your podcast site and write us a nice review or click a number of stars, that is equally appreciated. So anything you can do to raise our profile and support us is very, very much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean those things help basically immeasurably. So anything like that would be much appreciated.
Excellent.
Yes. And to answer your query, the way SEO works is the internet is basically an ocean, and that ocean is made up of messages crammed inside bottles. And you throw your message in a bottle into that ocean, and you have to make it stand out. That's what SEO is.
So you have to put like little flashing lights in your bottle before you throw it into the ocean.
Yeah, which everyone else is also doing.
Oh, good. This sounds terrible.
It is. Anyway.
Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
We will see you in a week, and we love you very much.
Yay, bye.
Bye.